Senator Vexai of the Andromedan Coalition adjusted her ceremonial robes as she prepared to address the Galactic Senate for what would be the most important vote in recent history. The massive circular chamber, built from crystallized starlight and quantum-locked metals, hummed with the nervous energy of 847 different species. Each delegation sat in their assigned sections, arranged by the ancient protocols that had governed galactic politics for over 3,000 years. The topic of today's emergency session was the proposed colonization of the Outer Rim sectors, specifically a collection of star systems that had remained mysteriously untouched, despite containing some of the richest mineral deposits in known space. The debate had raged for cycles, with various factions arguing over mining rights, territorial claims, and the distribution of resources. What none of them knew was that these systems had been deliberately avoided, marked in the oldest navigational charts with warnings that had been forgotten by most civilizations. As Vexai rose to speak, her compound eyes automatically scanned the chamber, a habit developed over decades of political maneuvering. Her gaze lingered momentarily on the empty seat in the front row, third from the left. The Terra Earth seat. Even after 20 years serving in the Senate, the sight of it still sent an involuntary shiver through her exoskeleton. The nameplate was carved from some unknown black material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, unlike every other seat in the chamber which bore the flowing scripts and elegant symbols of their respective species. This one was marked with harsh, angular characters that looked more like weapon scratches than writing. The seat itself was different too, built for bipedal humanoids with what the xenobiologists called an aggressive posture configuration. Honored delegates, Vexai began, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustic systems to reach every corner of the vast space. Today we stand at the threshold of a new age of prosperity. The Kepler 442 system and its neighbors represent an unprecedented opportunity for expansion and resource acquisition. The preliminary surveys indicate mineral wealth beyond our current calculations, with rare earth elements that could power our civilizations for millennia. A murmur of agreement rippled through the various delegations. The crystalline hierarchy chimed their approval in harmonic frequencies, while the gaseous collective released pheromones that translated roughly to enthusiastic support. Even the notoriously cautious hive minds were broadcasting positive consensus signals. Ambassador Thalrock of the warrior clan stood to speak, his massive frame imposing even by the standards of his militaristic species. The clans support this expansion, but we must address the elephant in the room. The universal translator struggled with the human idiom that had somehow entered galactic common speech millennia ago. These systems have been avoided for reasons our ancestors deemed important enough to encode in the most fundamental navigation protocols. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Every species had legends about the forbidden sectors, stories passed down through generations about the mysterious dangers that lurked in the unexplored regions of space. Most dismissed these as primitive superstitions, remnants from an earlier age when space travel was dangerous and unknown phenomena were attributed to supernatural causes. Senator Quinn Ara, of the Telepathic Collective, her brain case glowing with psychic energy, projected her thoughts directly into the minds of the assembled delegates. Her mental voice carried undertones of genuine concern. The ancient databases speak of a species that once controlled those sectors. The records are fragmented, but they suggest these beings were formidable. Myths and ghost stories, scoffed Director Zalton of the Corporate Federation, his cybernetic implants clicking as he accessed real-time market data. Our economic models show that the mineral wealth of these systems could solve the resource crisis that has plagued the galaxy for the past century. We cannot allow superstition to override practical necessity. As the debate continued, Security Chief Kethvar observed from his position in the upper galleries. Unlike the senators below, he had access to the classified archives, the sealed files that contained the real history of the galaxy. He knew why the Terra Earth seat remained empty. He had seen the footage from the Centauri incident, watched the recorded testimony from the survivors of the Vegan Contact War. Most importantly, he had read the unredacted reports from the Great Silence, the period when an entire species simply vanished from galactic civilization overnight, leaving behind only empty worlds and a warning that still gave him nightmares. The warning was simple. They went home. Do not follow. Kethvar's attention was drawn to his communication device as it began displaying an urgent priority alert. The message was from the Deep Space Monitoring Station at the edge of the galaxy, the facility responsible for tracking interstellar traffic and watching for signs of hostile activity. The text was brief but alarming. Unknown vessel approaching Senate Station. Configuration matches archived human designs. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. The device clattered to the floor as Kethvar's hands began to shake. Human designs. After 3,000 years of silence, they were coming back, and they were heading directly for the Senate station. Down in the chamber, the debate over the Outer Rim colonization continued, with various species presenting economic projections and resource allocation schemes. None of them noticed Kethvar as he quietly activated the emergency communication system and began sending coded messages to his security teams. The protocols had been in place for millennia, updated and refined by each generation of security chiefs who hoped they would never be needed. Priority Alpha. Initiate evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. Priority Beta. Activate planetary defense shields. Priority Gamma. Unseal the classified archives and prepare for first contact protocols. With designation Species 001, Terra Prime.
As Kethvar worked to implement the emergency measures, he couldn't help but wonder if they would be enough.
The classified files painted a picture of humanity that was both fascinating and terrifying. They were described as a species that had mastered faster-than-light travel when most civilizations were still discovering fire. Their technology was reportedly so advanced that it appeared to be indistinguishable from magic. Most disturbing of all, they were said to possess an emotional intensity and capacity for violence that had no equivalent in galactic civilization. The last recorded human contact had occurred during what the archives called the pacification period, when a single human vessel had somehow neutralized the entire Dominion fleet without firing a shot. The survivors reported that their weapons simply stopped working, their shields failed, and their engines shut down. When they had attempted to send a distress signal, they found that their communications had been replaced with a simple message. Violence is not the answer. Go home and think about what you've done. The Dominion, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, had limped home in shame and never spoke of the incident publicly. Within a generation, they had transformed from a conquering empire into a peaceful confederation dedicated to scientific research and cultural exchange. When asked about their dramatic philosophical shift, Dominion leaders would only say that they had learned some important lessons about the nature of conflict. In the Senate chamber below, Senator Vex High was calling for a preliminary vote on the colonization proposal when the first emergency alert reached the delegates' personal devices. The message was transmitted simultaneously to all 847 delegations in their native languages, but the content was identical. Security alert level orange. All non-essential personnel should prepare for potential evacuation. This is not a drill. A confused murmur spread through the chamber as delegates tried to understand what could have triggered such an alert during a routine legislative session. The Senate station was one of the most secure locations in the galaxy, protected by multiple layers of defense systems, and monitored constantly by the most advanced early warning networks available. Ambassador Thelrock's warrior instincts were the first to activate. His species had evolved on a world where constant vigilance was necessary for survival, and he could sense that something significant was happening. "Security Chief Kethvar," he called out, his voice carrying across the chamber with authority. "What is the nature of this emergency?" Kethvar appeared at the security podium, his normally composed demeanor visibly strained. The weight of what he was about to reveal pressed down on him like a physical force. For 3,000 years, the galactic community had lived in peace, believing themselves to be the masters of their own destiny. They were about to learn that they had been living under the protection of a species so powerful that their very absence had shaped the course of galactic civilization. "Honored delegates," Kethvar began, his voice carefully controlled despite the fear that was eating at his insides. "We have detected an approaching vessel that matches the design specifications of a species that has not been seen in galactic space for over 3 millennia. Based on our analysis, this ship belongs to the beings who once occupied the Terra Earth seat." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some delegates began frantically accessing their historical databases, trying to understand what this meant. Others activated their emergency communication systems, sending urgent messages to their home governments. The more militarily inclined species began discussing defensive strategies and alliance possibilities. Senator Vexhai felt her exoskeleton go cold as the implications sank in. Every species in the galaxy had stories about the mysterious beings who had once walked among them, beings so advanced that they had been regarded as gods or demons depending on the cultural perspective. The fact that they had simply vanished overnight had been one of the greatest mysteries in galactic history. "How long until arrival?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kethvar checked his instruments, though he already knew the answer. "Less than 2 hours, Senator. The vessel is not responding to our standard communication protocols, and our attempts to scan it have been unsuccessful. What he didn't tell the assembled delegates was that their most powerful sensors couldn't even properly detect the ship. It appeared on their screens as a vague shadow, a distortion in space-time that suggested the presence of something massive, but provided no details about its actual configuration or capabilities. The only reason they knew it was approaching was because it was allowing them to know. As panic began to spread through the chamber, Kethvar made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He activated the emergency broadcast system and began transmitting the classified files to every delegation simultaneously. If humanity was returning to galactic civilization, the other species deserved to know what they were dealing with. The files painted a picture that challenged everything the galactic community believed about their own history. Humanity hadn't just been another species among many. They had been the species that had first achieved interstellar travel, the ones who had established the basic principles of galactic civilization, the guardians who had protected younger species from threats they couldn't even comprehend. The Terra Earth seat wasn't empty because humans were extinct or had transcended physical existence. It was empty because they had chosen to leave, to step back and allow the other species to develop without their direct interference. They had become the galaxy's silent protectors, watching from the shadows and intervening only when absolutely necessary. But now they were returning. And nobody knew why. As the delegates absorbed this information, a new alert appeared on every screen in the chamber. The incoming vessel had suddenly accelerated beyond anything in the known laws of physics and would arrive in less than 30 minutes. More disturbing still, the deep space monitoring stations were reporting similar ships appearing throughout the galaxy, all heading toward major population centers. Humanity wasn't just returning to the Senate, they were coming home to the entire galaxy. And after 3,000 years of silence, they clearly had something important to say. The silence in the Senate chamber was broken by the soft hiss of atmospheric processes as they struggled to manage the sudden change in air composition caused by the panic-induced breathing patterns of 847 different species. Emergency lighting had activated automatically, casting everything in an amber glow that made the already tense situation feel even more surreal. Kethvar watched his screens with growing alarm as more reports flooded in from monitoring stations across the galaxy. The human vessels were arriving at every major population center simultaneously, a feat of coordination that shouldn't have been possible even with the most advanced communication systems. The implications were staggering. Either humanity had developed technology that operated outside the known laws of physics, or they had been watching and planning this return for centuries. In the depths of his security center, Kethvar pulled up the most classified file in the Galactic archives, one that bore the seal of the original Senate founders and carried a security rating so high that only 3 individuals in the entire galaxy were authorized to access it. The file was labeled simply, The Covenant. According to the document, humanity's departure from galactic civilization hadn't been voluntary, exile, or transcendence to a higher plane of existence. It had been a negotiated agreement, a covenant established between humanity and the emerging galactic community. The details were sparse, but the core message was clear. Humanity would withdraw from direct involvement in galactic affairs, allowing other species to develop naturally without the overwhelming influence of their advanced technology and philosophy. In exchange, the other species agreed to certain conditions. They would not expand into specific regions of space. They would not develop certain categories of weapons technology. Most importantly, they would maintain the Terra Earth seat in perpetuity as a symbol of humanity's continued membership in the galactic community, even if that membership remained inactive. The Covenant had worked flawlessly for 3,000 years. The galaxy had experienced unprecedented peace and prosperity, with conflicts remaining relatively minor and technological development proceeding at a steady, manageable pace. Most species had forgotten that this golden age was actually the result of careful management and oversight by unseen guardians. But now the Guardians were returning, and Kethvar suspected he knew why. The proposed colonization of the Outer Rim sectors represented a direct violation of the Covenant. Those star systems weren't unexplored because they were dangerous or worthless. They were off-limits because they fell within the boundaries that humanity had established as part of their withdrawal agreement. By voting to colonize those worlds, the Senate would be breaking a treaty they had forgotten existed. As Kethvar absorbed the implications of this revelation, his communication system activated with an incoming transmission from the approaching human vessel. Unlike the garbled signals and protocol errors that usually accompanied first contact situations, this message came through with perfect clarity in every language simultaneously. The voice that spoke was warm and distinctly human, with the kind of casual authority that came from absolute confidence. Galactic Senate Station, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Harmony. We're requesting permission to dock and address the Senate regarding recent developments. We apologize for any inconvenience our sudden arrival may have caused. The politeness of the message was somehow more unnerving than any threat could have been. Kethvar had expected demands, ultimatums, or demonstrations of overwhelming power. Instead, humanity was asking permission and apologizing for the disruption. It suggested a level of restraint and diplomatic sophistication that made their potential capabilities even more frightening. Down in the Senate chamber, the delegates had heard the transmission through their personal communication devices. The reaction was immediate and diverse, reflecting the different cultural perspectives and survival strategies that had evolved across the galaxy. The crystalline hierarchy began resonating at frequencies associated with deep contemplation, their natural response to encountering something beyond their current understanding. The gaseous collective released complex pheromone clouds that roughly translated to extreme caution mixed with intellectual curiosity. The hive minds had gone completely silent, their normal constant chatter replaced by what appeared to be intense internal debate. Ambassador Thelrock of the warrior clans stood slowly, his massive frame radiating the kind of controlled tension that preceded either violence or complete submission. His species had survived by recognizing superior force when they encountered it, and every instinct was telling him that humanity represented power beyond anything in his experience. "Security Chief Kethvar," he called out, his voice carefully modulated to avoid any hint of challenge or aggression. "What are your recommendations regarding this contact request?" Kethvar felt the weight of galactic history pressing down on him. His next words could determine whether this first contact proceeded peacefully or descended into the kind of interstellar incident that could reshape civilization. "Based on the classified protocols established by our predecessors, I recommend that we grant the docking request and prepare the Senate chamber for a formal address." Senator Vexe activated her speaking privileges, her compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting in complex patterns. "With respect to our security chief, shouldn't we consult with our respective governments before making such a momentous decision? The return of humanity is not something that should be handled by a single legislative body." "Senator," Kethvar replied, pulling up another classified file on his display. "According to the original Senate Charter, the Terra Earth delegation retains certain privileges that supersede normal diplomatic protocols. Specifically, they have the right to address the Senate directly without prior consultation or approval from member governments." The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Every species represented in the Senate had assumed that their current governmental systems and diplomatic procedures represented the natural evolution of galactic politics. The revelation that humanity had retained special privileges suggested that the entire structure of galactic civilization had been designed around their eventual return. As the delegates tried to process this information, the main display screens throughout the chamber activated, showing the exterior view from the station's observation sensors. Against the backdrop of stars and nebulae, a shape was materializing that defied easy description. The human vessel wasn't so much flying toward the station as sliding through space itself, moving with a fluid grace that made conventional spacecraft look clumsy and primitive by comparison. The ship's design was elegant in its simplicity, lacking the aggressive angles and defensive protrusions that characterized most military vessels. Instead, it appeared to be composed of flowing curves and organic shapes, as if it had been grown rather than built. There were no visible weapon systems, no armor plating, no external signs of the advanced technology that must be powering its impossible movement through space. As the Harmony approached the docking bay, the station's automated systems began reporting anomalous readings. The ship's mass was registering as both incredibly dense and impossibly light. Its energy signature was fluctuating in patterns that resembled musical harmonies more than technological emissions, and its whole material was reflecting sensor scans in ways that suggested it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Chief Engineer Tolvex of the Silicon-based Federation, whose species had achieved mastery over crystalline technology that most others considered magical, was monitoring the readings with growing amazement. "Colleagues," he announced, his voice carrying the harmonic overtones that indicated extreme excitement, "this vessel is demonstrating principles of physics that we have only theorized about." "It appears to be using what we might call consciousness-directed matter manipulation, combined with quantum empathy fields." The technical jargon meant little to most of the assembled delegates, but the tone of awe in Talvex's voice was universal. His species was known for their analytical detachment and reluctance to express wonder about technological achievements. For him to display such obvious amazement suggested that humanity's capabilities were beyond anything the current galactic community could comprehend. As the Harmony completed its docking procedures with fluid precision, HFY received another priority communication from his security teams. The message was brief but significant. All weapon systems on the station have been automatically disabled. All defensive shields have been deactivated. All sensors have been recalibrated to non-threatening configurations. These changes appear to be permanent and irreversible. The humans hadn't made any demands or issued any threats, but they had casually neutralized every defensive capability the station possessed. More unsettling still, they had done it in a way that didn't feel like an attack. The station's systems were functioning better than before, running more efficiently and harmoniously than they had in decades. It was as if humanity had given the technology a gentle adjustment that improved its performance while eliminating its potential for causing harm. HFY made a decision that would later be remembered as either the height of wisdom or the pinnacle of naivety. He activated the station-wide communication system and addressed not just the Senate delegates, but every being on the massive structure. Attention all personnel. We are about to receive a formal diplomatic visit from representatives of humanity, the species that originally helped establish the Galactic Senate over 3,000 years ago. This contact has been anticipated by our foundational protocols, and we will proceed according to the guidelines established by our predecessors. The announcement was followed by instructions that had been encoded in the station's most fundamental systems but never accessed until now. Emergency procedures were activated that cleared the main corridors leading to the Senate chamber. Additional seating was configured to accommodate potential observers. Most significantly, the chamber's central podium was modified to include a specific speaking position that matched the ergonomic requirements of human bipedal physiology. As these preparations proceeded, delegations throughout the chamber were engaged in frantic communication with their home governments. The revelation that humanity had never actually left galactic civilization, combined with their obvious technological superiority, was causing panic in some quarters and excitement in others. The Peaceful Assembly, a coalition of species dedicated to non-violence and conflict resolution, was expressing cautious optimism about the potential for learning from humanity's advanced diplomatic techniques. The Corporate Federation was already running economic models to determine the trade implications of renewed human contact. The warrior clans were conducting emergency sessions to determine whether humanity should be approached as potential allies, worthy opponents, or overlords to be served. In the midst of this chaos, a gentle chime sounded throughout the chamber, the same tone that traditionally announced the arrival of visiting dignitaries. But this time, the sound seemed to carry additional harmonics that induced a sense of calm and attentiveness in every species present, regardless of their biological configuration or psychological makeup. A section of the chamber wall that had appeared solid for 3 millennia suddenly dilated like an iris, revealing a passage that connected directly to the docking bay where the Harmony had birthed. The opening was perfectly circular and seemed to be lined with material that shifted color and texture as it responded to the ambient light and air currents. Through this passage walked 3 figures that immediately commanded the attention of every being in the chamber. They were recognizably human in their basic configuration, but they moved with a grace and presence that suggested they had evolved far beyond their original biological limitations. Their clothing appeared to be composed of living fabric that adjusted itself constantly to maintain perfect comfort and presentation. Most remarkably, they radiated an aura of calm authority that was felt rather than seen, a presence that suggested vast knowledge and experience combined with genuine benevolence. The figure in the center, presumably Captain Sarah Chen, paused at the threshold of the chamber and performed a gesture that was simultaneously a bow of respect and an acknowledgement of equal status. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the vast space without technological amplification. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Senate," she began. "We greet you as friends returning home after a long journey. We have come to discuss matters of mutual concern and to renew the bonds of cooperation that have served our galaxy well for millennia." As Captain Shen and her companions approached the central podium, every delegate in the chamber felt the weight of history settling around them like a physical presence. The empty Terra Earth seat was about to be occupied for the first time in 3,000 years, and the galaxy was about to learn why some seats were worth keeping empty until the right moment arrived. Captain Sarah Chen moved through the Senate chamber with the measured steps of someone who had walked these halls before, though that should have been impossible given humanity's 3,000-year absence. Her companions, introduced silently through some form of direct mental communication that every species present could understand, regardless of their telepathic capabilities, were Dr. Marcus Webb, Identified as a specialist in galactic ecosystems and sociological development, and Commander Lisa Park, whose title was given simply as Guardian and Protector. As the human delegation approached the Terra Earth seat, something extraordinary happened. The seat itself began to transform, its black material flowing like liquid to accommodate its occupants while maintaining its structural integrity. Additional seats materialized from the chamber floor for Dr. Rackard. Webb and Commander Park formed from the same mysterious substance that seemed to respond to conscious intention rather than physical manipulation. Senator Vexhai watched this display with a mixture of fascination and growing unease. Her species had achieved mastery over advanced biotechnology, but what she was witnessing suggested a level of integration between consciousness and matter that challenged her understanding of reality itself. The humans weren't using technology in any conventional sense. They were somehow collaborating with their environment in ways that made the distinction between user and tool meaningless. Captain Chen took her place at the central podium, but rather than beginning with the formal protocols that governed Senate addresses, she paused and looked directly at each delegation in turn. Her gaze wasn't intrusive or challenging, but it carried a depth of understanding that suggested she could see far more than physical appearances. When her eyes met those of individual delegates, many reported later that they felt as though she was acknowledging not just their presence, but their entire cultural history and the unique perspectives they brought to galactic civilization. "My friends," Captain Chen began, her voice carrying warmth and genuine affection, "before I address the specific circumstances that have brought us here today, I want to acknowledge the remarkable achievements of galactic civilization during our absence. You have built something beautiful together, a community based on mutual respect and cooperative growth that exceeds our most optimistic expectations from 3 millennia ago." The simple praise had an unexpected effect on the assembled delegates. Species that had been tense with anxiety or aggressive with territorial instincts found themselves relaxing, their biochemical stress responses automatically diminishing in response to Chen's presence. It wasn't technological manipulation or psychic influence. It was the kind of natural leadership that emerged from genuine care for others combined with absolute confidence in one's own abilities and intentions. "However," Chen continued, her tone shifting to carry a note of gentle concern, "we have observed recent developments that suggest it may be time to renew our active participation in galactic affairs. Specifically, we need to discuss the proposed colonization of the Kepler 442 system and surrounding regions." A murmur ran through the chamber as delegates realized that humanity's return was directly connected to the vote they had been preparing to take. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was the result of monitoring and analysis that had been ongoing for 3,000 years. Ambassador Thelrock of the warrior clans activated his speaking privileges, his massive frame still radiating controlled tension despite the calming influence of Chen's presence. "Captain Chen, with respect, the systems in question have been surveyed extensively by our best scientists and exploration teams. They contain vast mineral wealth that could benefit the entire galactic community. What specific concerns do you have regarding their colonization?" "Doctor." Marcus Webb rose smoothly from his seat, his movement accompanied by the subtle activation of holographic displays that materialized in the air above the central podium. The images showed star charts and planetary configurations, but they contained information that went far beyond what conventional sensors could detect. "Ambassador Thelrock," Dr. Webb replied, his voice carrying the patient tone of an experienced teacher. "Your surveys have been thorough within the limitations of current technology. However, there are aspects of those systems that require specialized detection methods to observe properly." The holographic display shifted to show the Kepler 442 system in unprecedented detail. What the delegates saw challenged everything they thought they knew about planetary science and stellar mechanics. The system wasn't just a collection of planets orbiting a star. It was a complex, interconnected ecosystem that operated on principles of consciousness and intentionality that most species had only encountered in philosophical discussions. "These worlds are not uninhabited in the conventional sense," Dr. Webb explained as the images zoomed in to show what appeared to be crystalline networks spanning entire continents. "They are home to a form of consciousness that exists at the intersection of geological and quantum processes. The mineral formations you've detected aren't just valuable resources. They're the equivalent of neural networks for planetary-scale minds." The implications of this revelation hit the delegates like a physical force. They had been preparing to vote on the colonization and resource extraction from worlds that were actually living, thinking beings. The moral implications were staggering. But the practical consequences were even more concerning. Commander Lisa Park stood and addressed the chamber with the kind of quiet authority that suggested vast experience in managing dangerous situations. The planetary consciousnesses in question are not hostile to organic life, but they are highly sensitive to disruption. Mining operations of the scale being proposed would cause them significant distress, potentially leading to responses that could affect stellar stability throughout the region. Chief Engineer Talvex of the Silicon-based Federation, whose species had the most advanced understanding of crystalline consciousness in the galaxy, activated his speaking privileges with harmonic frequencies that indicated extreme agitation.
Commander Park, are you suggesting that these planets could actually respond to mining activities? What kind of responses are we discussing?
The holographic display shifted again, showing historical data that none of the assembled species had ever seen before.
The images depicted star systems that had experienced seemingly natural disasters, solar flares, gravitational anomalies, asteroid field formations that had destroyed mining operations and research stations. These weren't natural disasters, Commander Park explained with the calm professionalism of someone delivering a routine briefing about world-ending catastrophes. They were defensive responses from planetary consciousnesses that felt threatened by extraction activities. The beings involved don't understand the concept of malicious intent. They simply respond to perceived threats with whatever means are available to them. Senator Quinara of the Telepathic Collective, her brain case glowing with intense psychic activity, projected a question that reached every mind in the chamber simultaneously. How is it possible that our most advanced telepathic surveys failed to detect these consciousness patterns? My species has developed techniques for communication with non-biological entities. Captain Chen smiled with the kind of gentle understanding that teachers show to promising students who are asking exactly the right questions. Senator Quinara, your telepathic capabilities are indeed impressive within the spectrum of consciousness that operates through biological neural networks. However, these planetary minds function on quantum frequencies that exist outside the normal bandwidth of organic telepathy. It's not a limitation of your abilities. It's simply a different category of consciousness entirely. Dr. Webb activated additional holographic displays that showed the complex relationships between planetary consciousness, stellar mechanics, and the quantum fabric of space-time itself. What we're dealing with here is what we call macroscale quantum consciousness, a form of awareness that emerges from the interaction of gravitational fields, electromagnetic radiation, and the quantum properties of matter at planetary scales. These beings experience time differently than we do, think in terms of geological epochs, and communicate through methods that most species would interpret as natural phenomena. The revelation that they had been sharing the galaxy with forms of consciousness they couldn't even detect was humbling enough, but the implications went much deeper. If humanity could perceive and communicate with these entities, what other aspects of reality were they aware of that remained hidden from the rest of galactic civilization? Director Zoltan of the Corporate Federation, his cybernetic implants processing economic calculations at tremendous speed, raised the practical question that many delegates were thinking. Captain Chen, if these worlds cannot be mined or colonized, what alternatives exist for addressing the resource shortages that are driving this expansion initiative? Captain Chen's response demonstrated the kind of comprehensive thinking that had made humanity such effective guardians of galactic civilization. Director Zoltan, the resource shortage you're experiencing isn't actually due to a lack of available materials. It's the result of inefficient distribution systems and technologies that haven't been updated to take advantage of more sustainable alternatives. Commander Park activated a new series of holographic displays that showed resource flows throughout the galaxy in real time. The patterns revealed waste and inefficiency on a scale that shocked even the most experienced economists and logistics specialists among the delegates. For example, Commander Park continued, the energy requirements for faster-than-light travel could be reduced by approximately 90% through the use of quantum resonance techniques that work in harmony with spacetime, rather than forcing their way through it. Similarly, manufacturing processes could be made far more efficient by incorporating consciousness-directed matter manipulation, reducing waste and increasing output simultaneously. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just offering to help solve the resource crisis. They were suggesting that the crisis itself was largely unnecessary, the result of using primitive techniques when more advanced alternatives were available. Webb stood again, his holographic displays shifting to show technological designs and theoretical frameworks that made the assembled delegates feel like children looking at adult mathematics. We understand that introducing new technologies too quickly can be disruptive to social and economic systems. That's one of the reasons we withdrew from active participation 3,000 years ago. However, the current situation suggests that it may be time to begin a gradual technology transfer program, carefully managed, to minimize disruption while addressing your most pressing needs. Senator Vaxi felt her worldview reshaping itself around these revelations. Humanity hadn't just been absent from galactic civilization. They had been watching and analyzing, waiting for the right moment to offer assistance. The empty Terra Earth seat hadn't been a symbol of loss or absence. It had been a promise that help would be available when it was truly needed. But even as she began to appreciate the magnitude of what humanity was offering, a new question occurred to her. If they had such advanced capabilities and had been monitoring galactic civilization for millennia, why had they waited until now to intervene? What had changed to make this the right moment for their return? As if reading her thoughts, Captain Chen addressed the chamber with a more serious tone than she had used previously. My friends, there is one additional matter we need to discuss. Our return at this particular moment isn't coincidental. We have detected signs that suggest the galaxy may soon face challenges that will require the cooperative efforts of all consciousness forms, both biological and quantum scale, to address effectively. The comfortable atmosphere that had been building in the chamber suddenly shifted as delegates realized that humanity's return wasn't just about preventing a diplomatic crisis or offering technological assistance. They were here because something much larger was approaching, something that would require the combined efforts of species that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. Captain Chen looked around the chamber one more time, her gaze carrying both reassurance and gentle warning. The vote you were preparing to take on outer rim colonization would have inadvertently triggered responses from the planetary consciousnesses that could destabilize this entire region of space. But more importantly, it would have diverted resources and attention away from the preparations we need to make for what's coming. Commander Park activated a final holographic display, this one showing something that made every delegate in the chamber feel a chill of primitive fear. At the edge of the galaxy, beyond the reach of conventional sensors, something vast and complex was approaching. It wasn't a ship or a fleet or even a conventional threat. It was something that existed on a scale that challenged comprehension, moving through space in ways that suggested it operated according to entirely different physical laws. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored consciousness forms, Captain Chen concluded, the galaxy is about to receive visitors from outside our local cosmic neighborhood, and, unlike our return today, their intentions are completely unknown. The silence that followed Captain Chen's final statement was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the Senate chamber. It wasn't the absence of sound, but rather the presence of something so overwhelming that normal communication became inadequate. Every species represented in the chamber had evolved different responses to existential threats, and for a moment, the chamber became a living demonstration of the diversity of consciousness under extreme stress. The crystalline hierarchy had gone completely silent, their normally constant harmonic resonance replaced by what could only be described as crystalline shock. The gaseous collective was releasing pheromone clouds in such complex patterns that their translation systems were simply displaying error messages. The hive minds had entered a state of emergency consensus building that made their previous silence look like casual conversation. Dr. Mig. Marcus Webb allowed the implications to settle before activating additional holographic displays that provided more detail about the approaching phenomenon. The images were unlike anything conventional sensors could produce, showing structures and entities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What you're seeing, Dr. Webb explained with the calm professionalism of someone who had been studying cosmic-scale threats for centuries, represents the advanced scouts of what we call an extragalactic consciousness collective. Based on our long-range observations, they appear to be explorers or researchers, but their scale of operation is so vast that their mere presence could fundamentally alter the structure of space-time in our region. The holographic display zoomed in to show individual components of the approaching collective, revealing structures that defied easy description. They appeared to be composed of organized energy patterns that maintained coherent shapes across vast distances, demonstrating technologies that made humanity's advanced capabilities look primitive by comparison. Ambassador Thelrock of the warrior clans was the first to recover his voice, his species' warrior instincts providing him with a framework for processing threats regardless of their scale. Dr. Webb, you mentioned these are scouts. What are they scouting for? Are we dealing with a potential invasion scenario? Commander Lisa Park rose to address the question, her bearing suggesting the kind of military experience that had dealt with threats across multiple scales of reality. Ambassador, the concept of invasion may not apply to beings that operate at this level of development. Our analysis suggests they are conducting what we might call cosmic archaeology, studying the development of consciousness patterns throughout the universe. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber as delegates began to understand what it meant to be the subject of cosmic archaeology. They weren't dealing with a military threat in any conventional sense. They were potentially about to become specimens in a research project conducted by entities whose intellectual capacity was to theirs as theirs was to single-celled organisms. Senator Vexay activated her speaking privileges, her compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting as she struggled to formulate questions adequate to the situation. Commander Park, what does this mean for galactic civilization? Are we in danger of being studied to death? Captain Chen stepped forward to address this concern, her presence somehow managing to provide reassurance even in the face of such overwhelming circumstances. Senator Vexay, based on our observations of similar contact events in other regions of the universe, the extragalactic collective appears to follow ethical guidelines regarding the consciousness forms they study. However, their research methods operate on such vast timescales and spatial scales that what they consider harmless observation could inadvertently disrupt entire stellar regions. Webb activated new displays that showed the effects of previous contacts between the collective and other galactic communities. The images were sobering. Entire star systems had been reorganized to facilitate observation, with planets moved to optimize research conditions. Stellar mechanics had been adjusted to provide better energy flows for consciousness mapping activities. Most disturbing, time itself had been dilated in some regions to allow for extended observation periods. The civilizations that experienced these contacts weren't destroyed, Dr. Webb explained, but they were fundamentally altered. Their development was accelerated in some areas and slowed in others, creating evolutionary paths that served the research interests of the collective rather than the natural progression of the species involved. Chief Engineer Talvex of the Silicon-based Federation, whose species had always prided itself on technological advancement, asked the question that several delegates were thinking. Dr. Webb, if these beings possess such overwhelming technological superiority, what can we possibly do to protect ourselves? Are we simply at their mercy? The answer came not from the human delegation, but from an unexpected source. The holographic displays suddenly flickered and were replaced by new images that appeared to be transmitted directly from the approaching collective itself. The transmission was accompanied by a form of communication that bypassed language entirely, delivering meaning directly to the consciousness of every being present. The message was complex but clear. The extragalactic collective was indeed approaching to study galactic consciousness development, but they had detected something unusual about this particular galaxy that warranted special consideration. The presence of what they called multi-scale consciousness integration had attracted their attention as a unique phenomenon worthy of detailed investigation. As the transmission ended, Captain Chen smiled with what appeared to be satisfaction rather than surprise. That communication demonstrates exactly why we chose to return at this moment. The collective has detected the same thing that we've been monitoring for 3,000 years. This galaxy has developed a form of consciousness integration that appears nowhere else in our local cosmic neighborhood. Dr. Webb activated displays that showed the complex relationships between the various forms of consciousness that existed throughout the galaxy. Biological consciousness, artificial intelligence, quantum-scale planetary minds, stellar-level awareness patterns, and what appeared to be galactic-scale consciousness phenomena were all interconnected in ways that created something greater than the sum of their parts. What makes this galaxy unique, Dr. Webb explained, is not any individual species or consciousness form, but the way all these different types of awareness have learned to cooperate and evolve together. The extragalactic collective has studied thousands of galaxies, but they've never encountered a system where consciousness operates successfully across so many different scales simultaneously. Commander Park stood to address the tactical implications of this revelation. The collective's research interest presents both an opportunity and a challenge. They want to study us because we represent something unique and valuable. However, their research methods could inadvertently destroy the very phenomenon they're trying to understand. Senator Quinara, of the Telepathic Collective, projected a question that carried undertones of both hope and desperation. Is there a way to satisfy their research interests without subjecting ourselves to potentially harmful observation methods? Captain Chen's response revealed the true reason for humanity's return to galactic civilization. Senator Quinara, that's exactly what we've been working toward for the past 3 millennia. We've been developing communication protocols and interaction frameworks that might allow for collaborative research rather than passive observation. The holographic display shifted to show something that looked like a massive, cosmic-scale version of a diplomatic conference table. The design incorporated consciousness interface technologies that could accommodate beings operating at vastly different scales of existence, from individual biological entities to galactic-level awareness patterns. We propose, Captain Chen continued, to establish a formal first contact protocol with the extragalactic collective based on mutual scientific collaboration. Instead of being subjects in their research, we become partners in a joint investigation of consciousness development. Dr. Webb provided additional details about the proposed collaboration. The collective is particularly interested in understanding how consciousness can maintain coherence and purpose while operating across multiple scales simultaneously. By working with them directly, we can help them gather the data they need while ensuring that their research methods don't disrupt our natural development processes. Director Zoltan of the Corporate Federation, his cybernetic implants working overtime to process the economic implications of cosmic-scale research collaboration, raised a practical concern. Captain Chen, what kind of resources would such a collaboration require? Are we talking about planetary-scale construction projects or system-wide reorganization efforts? Commander Park's response demonstrated the kind of comprehensive planning that humanity had been conducting during their long observation period. Director Zoltan, the infrastructure requirements are actually less disruptive than what the collective would implement if left to their own devices. We're proposing to establish a series of consciousness interface stations at key points throughout the galaxy, each designed to facilitate communication between different scales of awareness without requiring physical modifications to existing worlds or systems. The display showed elegant structures that appeared to float in space, connected by networks of energy that followed the natural gravitational and electromagnetic patterns of the galaxy itself. The stations were designed to enhance existing consciousness patterns rather than replacing or modifying them. These interface stations would serve multiple purposes, Dr. Webb explained. They would provide the research data that the collective needs, facilitate improved communication between different consciousness forms within our own galaxy, and serve as early warning systems for other cosmic-scale phenomena that might affect our region. As the delegates absorbed this information, they began to realize that humanity's proposal offered benefits that went far beyond simply surviving the current crisis. The consciousness interface technology could revolutionize galactic civilization, making possible forms of cooperation and understanding that had never been achieved before. Ambassador Thelrock stood slowly, his warrior instincts now focused on the strategic advantages of the proposed alliance. Captain Chen, I believe I speak for many of us when I say that this collaboration sounds promising in theory. However, we need to understand the specific commitments and risks involved. What exactly would be required from each member species? Captain Chen's smile widened as she realized that the galactic community was ready to consider humanity's proposal seriously. Ambassador Thelrock, the requirements are actually quite modest from a technological standpoint, but significant from a philosophical perspective. Each species would need to contribute their unique understanding of consciousness to the collaborative research effort. Dr. Webb elaborated on the practical details. For example, the telepathic collective's expertise in biological consciousness patterns would be essential for understanding how awareness scales from individual to group levels. The silicon-based Federation's work with crystalline consciousness could help bridge the gap between biological and quantum-scale awareness. The warrior clan's understanding of survival consciousness could provide insights into how awareness maintains coherence under stress. The realization was dawning on the delegates that humanity wasn't just proposing a defensive alliance against cosmic-scale researchers, they were suggesting a new form of galactic civilization based on the conscious collaboration of all awareness forms, from individual beings to planetary minds to stellar consciousness patterns. But even as excitement began to build in the chamber, Commander Park introduced a sobering note of urgency. My friends, while we discuss these possibilities, the extragalactic collective continues to approach. Based on our calculations, we have approximately 6 standard months to establish preliminary communication protocols before they reach the outer edges of our galaxy. The timeline was tight, but not impossible. More importantly, it provided a concrete deadline that could focus the efforts of the entire galactic community on a single, shared objective. Captain Chen looked around the chamber one final time before making her closing statement. Honored delegates, 3,000 years ago, humanity stepped back from galactic leadership because we believed that all consciousness forms deserve the opportunity to develop naturally. Today, we're asking to step forward again, not as leaders, but as partners in something greater than any of us could achieve alone. The empty Terra Earth seat was no longer empty, and the galaxy was about to discover what it meant to have humanity as active partners rather than silent guardians. 6 months had passed since humanity's return to the Galactic Senate, and the transformation of galactic civilization had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The consciousness interface stations were ahead of construction schedule, their elegant structures now visible from dozens of worlds as they floated serenely in the gravitational balance points between star systems. More importantly, the collaborative research project had already begun yielding insights that were revolutionizing every aspect of scientific and philosophical understanding. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the newly constructed Cosmic Communication Center, a facility that existed simultaneously in normal space and in the quantum dimensions where the extragalactic collective operated. Through the center's advanced consciousness interface systems, she could perceive the approaching collective not as a threatening unknown, but as a group of cosmic-scale researchers whose excitement about galactic consciousness development was palpable even across the vast distances of space. The past months had seen unprecedented cooperation between species that had previously operated in complete isolation from each other. The telepathic collective had established communication links with the quantum-scale planetary minds, creating a network of awareness that spanned entire star systems. The silicon-based Federation had developed crystalline consciousness amplifiers that allowed biological species to perceive time-dilated geological thoughts. Most remarkably, the warrior clans had discovered that their survival instincts could be applied to protecting consciousness patterns as well as physical territories, making them natural guardians of the new inter-awareness networks. Dr. Marcus Webb's research teams had documented over 1,000 different forms of consciousness operating throughout the galaxy, from microscopic quantum fluctuations that displayed organized behavior to stellar-scale minds that thought in terms of million-year cycles. Each discovery had added new dimensions to the collaborative research project, providing the extragalactic collective with data about consciousness development that exceeded their expectations from studying hundreds of other galaxies. The first formal contact was scheduled for today, and representatives from every consciousness scale would participate simultaneously through the interface stations. The event would mark not just first contact with an extragalactic civilization, but the debut of the galaxy's new integrated consciousness network as a unified entity capable of meaningful communication with cosmic-scale beings. In the Senate chamber, now expanded to accommodate representatives from consciousness forms that didn't require physical bodies, the atmosphere was one of excited anticipation rather than the fear that had characterized humanity's return 6 months earlier. The Terra Earth seat was no longer unique in its design. Similar accommodations had been made for consciousness forms that experienced reality as energy patterns, gravitational fluctuations, or quantum probability clouds. Senator Vex-High, now serving as the elected coordinator of the Biological Consciousness Coalition, watched the preparation activities with a sense of wonder that had become her normal state over the past months. The revelation that consciousness operated on so many different scales had fundamentally changed her understanding of reality. But more importantly, it had shown her that cooperation between different forms of awareness could achieve things that none of them could accomplish alone. The consciousness interface technology had enabled new forms of scientific research that were producing breakthrough discoveries almost daily. Biological medicine had been revolutionized by insights from quantum-scale consciousness about the relationship between awareness and cellular function. Stellar engineering had become possible through collaboration with stellar-level minds that could adjust solar output and gravitational fields through conscious intention. Most significantly, time perception research had revealed that consciousness could influence the flow of time itself, opening possibilities for temporal communication and coordination that had only existed in theoretical physics. Ambassador Thalrock, now leading the newly formed Consciousness Protection Corps, had found that his warrior instincts translated perfectly to safeguarding awareness patterns from disruption or interference. His teams had developed defensive techniques that could shield consciousness from harmful influences while maintaining the open communication channels necessary for collaborative research. The irony wasn't lost on him that his species' martial traditions had evolved into the galaxy's primary peaceful protection force. As the appointed time for first contact approached, Commander Lisa Park activated the Cosmic Communication Center's main interface systems. The holographic displays throughout the chamber showed the approach of the extragalactic collective in real time, but now the images were supplemented by direct consciousness-level communication that allowed every participant to experience the collective's presence as vast, ancient, and surprisingly gentle. The collective had spent the past months observing the galaxy's consciousness integration project with what could only be described as cosmic delight. Their communications, mediated through humanity's translation protocols, expressed amazement at the speed and effectiveness with which different consciousness forms had learned to cooperate. They had studied thousands of galaxies over millions of years, but they had never encountered a system that demonstrated such rapid and successful consciousness integration. Captain Chen activated her speaking privileges and addressed both the assembled delegates and the approaching collective simultaneously, Her words carried through normal space by conventional communication systems and through quantum dimensions by consciousness interface technology. Honored members of the Extragalactic Collective, she began. On behalf of the integrated consciousness network of this galaxy, we welcome you as fellow researchers in the grand investigation of awareness and existence. We offer our collaboration in your studies, and we hope to learn from your vast experience with consciousness development throughout the universe. The response came not as words, but as a complex information transfer that provided complete details about the collective's research methodologies, their discoveries about consciousness in other regions of the universe, and their specific interests in galactic-scale awareness integration. The communication was accompanied by something that could only be described as cosmic-scale gratitude for the galaxy's willingness to participate as research partners rather than passive subjects.
Dr.
Webb's translation systems work to convert the information transfer into formats accessible to biological consciousness while preserving the essential meaning and emotional content. What emerged was a research proposal of breathtaking scope and ambition. The Extragalactic Collective wasn't just interested in studying consciousness development. They were part of a universe-wide project to understand how awareness itself had emerged from the fundamental forces of physics. Their research spanned multiple universes and dimensions, tracking the evolution of consciousness from quantum probability fluctuations to cosmic-scale intelligence networks like their own collective. More remarkably, they had discovered that consciousness wasn't just an emergent property of complex systems, but appeared to be a fundamental force of nature, comparable to gravity or electromagnetism. Their studies suggested that awareness itself was actively shaping the evolution of the universe, steering the development of physical laws and cosmic structures toward configurations that supported ever more complex and sophisticated forms of consciousness. The galaxy's successful integration of multiple consciousness scales represented a crucial data point in this universal research project. The collective's analysis indicated that galaxies capable of achieving consciousness integration were rare, perhaps occurring only once in every billion star systems. The successful examples served as seed points for consciousness development throughout their cosmic neighborhoods, potentially influencing the evolution of awareness across vast regions of space. Senator Quinn Ara, of the Telepathic Collective, projected a question that reached every consciousness form participating in the contact event. Honored researchers, what role would our galaxy play in this universe-wide consciousness development project? The collective's response came with undertones of excitement that transcended species boundaries. The galaxy would serve as a demonstration site and training center for other regions attempting consciousness integration. The techniques developed here would be shared with developing galaxies throughout the local cosmic group, accelerating consciousness evolution across billions of star systems. More importantly, the galaxy would become part of the collective's extended research network, contributing its unique perspective on consciousness integration to a database of knowledge that spanned multiple universes. The consciousness interface stations would be connected to similar facilities in other galaxies, creating a communication network that operated on scales that challenged the imagination. Director Zoltan of the Corporate Federation, his economic models now expanded to include consciousness development as a measurable resource, raised the practical question that many participants were considering. What are the resource requirements for participating in such a vast research project? Commander Park's response demonstrated how thoroughly humanity had planned for this possibility. Director Zoltan, the resource requirements are actually negative. Participation in the collective's research network provides access to technologies and knowledge that will make our current resource challenges obsolete. Consciousness-directed matter manipulation, dimensional energy extraction, and temporal coordination techniques will eliminate scarcity as a limiting factor for galactic development. The implications were staggering. The galaxy would transition from a resource-limited civilization struggling with expansion challenges to a post-scarcity society capable of pursuing consciousness development as its primary objective. The proposed colonization of the Outer Rim sectors, which had triggered humanity's return, would become unnecessary as better alternatives became available. Chief Engineer Talvex of the Silicon-based Federation, now serving as Coordinator of Consciousness Technology Integration, provided technical details about the new capabilities that would become available. Colleagues, the collective's research network includes technologies that operate by direct consciousness manipulation of quantum fields. Material objects can be created, modified, or relocated through focused intention rather than physical manipulation. Energy can be extracted from dimensional intersections rather than stellar fusion. Time itself can be adjusted to optimize consciousness development processes. The technological revolution would be unprecedented. but the social and philosophical changes would be even more profound. Galactic civilization would evolve from a collection of separate species competing for resources to an integrated consciousness network capable of pursuing goals that spanned cosmic timescales. As the contact event continued, the collective provided detailed proposals for the galaxy's integration into the universe-wide consciousness research project. The process would be gradual, allowing each consciousness form to adapt to expanded awareness capabilities without losing their unique perspectives and cultural characteristics.